I'd like to welcome you back to the Bloody Fork Homestead. We've kind of been looking at a mini-series in these YouTube videos on food security. Food security is one thing that we all desire to have. We want to be secure with our food supply. But there are, I believe, 5 P's when it comes to food security. And the first thing has to do with procuring or purchasing food. A P, you purchase it. That's what most people think of when it comes to food. They think, well, you buy it. You go to the grocery store, or you go to the wholesale club, or you might order it through Amazon or perhaps Walmart. You get it delivered. DoorDash might bring you some food, or whatever you think, you purchase it. And that's what most people think of when they think of food security, is the ability to purchase it. But to have food security, I believe you have to move past that. You have to learn to produce food. Producing your own food in the home, and no matter where that is. You might live in an apartment, but you can produce some food. You can grow sprouts, you can do microgreens, you can have a container garden, or you can join a community garden. But being able to produce some of your own food, I believe that's essential for food security. Especially now that we live in this highly inflationary time, and you go to the grocery store and you have sticker shock every time you go and you see the prices of things. For instance, I looked at a loaf of bread in our local Engel store, and this was a special bread. It was gluten-free bread, but it was $7.60 a loaf. And Quaker Oats, it's over $7 for a container. It's amazing. It's amazing what some of the stores are charging now, and many people are finding they can't afford that. So you have to move beyond that to be able to produce some of your own food. Learn the skills of food production, of gardening. It's essential. And that's where YouTube can help a lot to teach you, or how you can learn to grow some of your own food. You need to move beyond simply being a consumer to being a producer. To experience food security, you have to know how to produce some things. But when you have an abundance that comes from the garden, you also have to learn to preserve it. So you purchase and you produce, but you also have to preserve. Learning how to preserve food. Right now, we have an abundance. There's an abundance of tomatoes and green beans and other things growing in the garden. And what's essential right now for us is being able to preserve those things. To canned green beans. My wife, she also dried some green beans, which we're trying some dehydrated ones. But we got green beans coming out of our ears. Tomatoes everywhere. Being able to freeze some of those and can some of those and make salsa, make sauces, different things. But learning those skills of food preservation, to have food security, you have to learn some of those skills. Have a good canner where you can can some of your food. You produce it, you preserve it. It has to go beyond simply storing up food that you purchase. That's what many preppers do, but if you don't learn to grow it yourself, having that ability to do it, you're not really going to experience food security. Being able to preserve food, important. And again, YouTube has many good examples of preserving food, how to do it. A tremendous resource that you can use for your family. But there's another P I'd like to consider with you, and that is to perpetuate food security. This is the thing that I think is lacking many times when it comes to food security. You have to perpetuate it. If you know how to grow food, being able to teach other people how to grow food. You and neighbors coming together to learn those skills of gardening, teaching others to those skills that are needed to grow food and preserve food. Perpetuate it. You pass it along to others. One generation to the next, perpetuating those skills that are needed to both produce and preserve food. If we're missing that element, I don't think ultimately in our society we're going to have food security. One reason for this is there's a great disconnect. There's a disconnect between the food that we buy and working with our own hands to produce and preserve it. The government has aided in this. The government has made it available to be able to get food and not work for it. But that's the way it's always been in history. People, if you wanted to eat, you worked for it. You produce something. But we have a great disconnect today because of industrialization and our industrial food supply. A big ag will provide us with all this food that most of it's high in fat, it's high in salt, it's high in corn syrup and those things that lead to obesity, killing people. And the government will give you some SNAP benefits to get some of that cheap food. We're perpetuating dependency. We're not perpetuating skills that are needed to produce food on our own. Because of that, it leads to a great insecurity when it comes to food. Even the food that you buy, most of it's not good for you. It doesn't have great nutritional value. And if you go and try to buy the organic stuff, the fruits and vegetables that are organic, you can't afford it with your SNAP benefits. There's this disconnect. I believe if we're going to have food security again, we need to come back to producing our own food on small farms, on small acreage, on little garden spots in communities and also in cities. We need to produce it on our own. It needs to be a local movement. Right now, we are dependent on big ag. We're dependent on fertilizers. We're dependent on pesticides and herbicides in order to produce food in abundance. And then we ship it out somewhere and we do something with it. And there's a big food chain. Much of what is produced here in America might be shipped to China, where they'll do something else with that food and ship it back to us, and we consume it in some way. But big ag, we're finding out that big ag is in trouble right now. We have the environmental movement that with the WEF and the UN Commission of 2030 Commission, where they want to have a zero carbon emissions, and they're set on this, and people like the farmers in Holland and the Netherlands, they're dealing with mandates and they're protesting, dealing with mandates to lower their carbon footprint. Farmers less dependent on fertilizers and the ammonia that's produced because of confinement, confining animals and other things. But there's a great change. Environmentalists want to bring about these changes. But how damn dumb can these ideologues be? Here you have a world that's dependent on big ag. I mean, in a lot of ways. We're dependent on fertilizers. We're dependent on the petro-fuel industry to make big ag happen. And yet at the same time, what they're saying is we're simply going to make everyone get by with less fertilizer. You're going to lower your carbon footprint. But what's totally lacking here is the incentive for people to work on their own, to do some things, to produce their own food locally. That's what's lacking today. So what do we have? We have the WEF, the World Economic Forum. They have the goal to try to take farmland and farm production away from farmers so that they have control, and to bring in these mandates and to dictate these different mandates to people. At the same time, when we have warfare going on, we live in highly inflationary times. And what's going to happen if we go along with this? What's going to happen is millions of people are going to starve to death in the world because of our stupidity. You see, I believe we need to get away from some aspects of big ag, but how we do it is of utter importance. If you do it through mandates and you don't replace it with something better, if you don't incentivize people to grow their own on small farms again, or in community gardens, if we don't have an incentive to do that, we're barking up the wrong tree. You can't simply reduce everything and expect to feed the world. People have to learn how to fish themselves, so to speak. You can't just keep giving the fish. People have to learn to fish. In the same way as it's true for food production. People need to do food production again. The United States of America, many parts of the world, food security came as a result of people producing on their own private property. You see, there are two competing ideologies today. One is the ideology of the WEF, or whatever, who's in control of trying to dictate these things on the government level. The ideology of environmentalism that says, yes, we need to reduce our carbon footprint and we need to save the world as a result of that. And at the same time, we're going to starve some people. And maybe that's what they want. But you have that ideology, and ultimately where it ends up with no private ownership of land. Because WEF, or who wants to have ultimate control, takes ultimate control, and you're completely dependent. I call that the Shanghai dependency. The high rise in Shanghai, where everyone was totally dependent on the government, and then the government shuts everything down because of COVID, and everybody's in their apartment, and food is brought to you, and life is good. And that's the goal of the WEF. It will be, well, you will own nothing and you'll be happy. The problem with that, whenever that's socialistic, the mandates that go along with that was tried anywhere, it led to mass starvation. Because food production is best left in the hands of individuals, families, and private ownership. Being able to own a piece of property and produce some self-sufficiency on that piece of property. We live in Appalachia, and on our road and everywhere you drive around here, there used to be a lot of self-sufficiency. And one of the things that many people grew in order to experience self-sufficiency was tobacco. And all around, in fact, there's one here on our property, there's a tobacco barn where people, they gathered the tobacco together and they dried it in the barn. But tobacco used to be the cash crop here. There were self-sufficient places, small farms all around. People, they would produce a large garden, they would have a few animals, but they would have a cash crop, and that cash crop was tobacco. And tobacco is what you sold in order to put some shoes on your kids' feet. It was what you used to pay for certain things that you bought at the little store, in the little country store. But the government in their wisdom cut it all off. So what you have to replace it is food dependency. You have SNAP benefits. And many people all over Appalachia are completely dependent on the government for their SNAP benefits. So now, instead of producing food on your own, you look to your uncle to provide it all. But he is a lousy provider. He provides food that is harmful. High in fat and salt, and obesity is the result of it. And many people are obese because they don't have to do anything. They don't have to work for their food. And the only food that they can really afford is what Big Ag is providing. And it's food that's not good for you in many different ways. We need a different vision. We need a different vision that comes back to the local level. And instead of Bill Gates buying up farmland, do whatever with it, and why he's buying thousands of acres, or China is coming into America buying lots and lots of acreage, and the government wants to take control of what we do with our farms, we need to return to a local movement, a grassroots movement. You see, this is the basis for food security. When we in our communities begin to produce our own food, when we're less dependent on the food chain, when we're less dependent on China, we're less dependent on SNAP benefits, when we begin to produce it on our own, when we perpetuate the skills that are needed to do it, that's when we can have food security in our communities. You see, you can be a prepper all you want. You can store up all you want, but unless we have a movement that goes back to producing it on our own and perpetuating it in our communities, there is no ultimate food security. Why don't we incentivize people to grow some things? Why doesn't Bill Gates give some farmland to different people to be able to settle on and have a little bit of acreage to grow some of their own food to experience food security? Why doesn't the government incentivize work instead of people sitting on their ass and getting the bad food put into them that leads to more obesity? There's a better way. And that better way is what many people identify as the local food movement. One of the things that we do here in Western North Carolina is we go to the farmers market. We sell there. We have certain things that are in abundance, and we like to take it there and sell it. And we're meeting lots of people coming through who want to return to some kind of self-sufficiency. They're realizing that they've become too dependent on the industrial food supply. They want to produce some things on their own. They want to come to the market to buy food that's been produced locally. That's the movement that we need to incentivize. We need that movement if we're going to save the environment. That's how you do it. You have organic farms, you have organic food that people grow, you deal with obesity, you deal with the laziness problem, you incentivize work. If the government had half a brain, this is what they would incentivize. Breaking up big ag. But of course, they're the ones that have the tremendous influence in Washington because they have the lobbying power. But we need more than anything that grassroots movement toward local production of food, producing on our own. On our little homestead here, we have expanded our garden. We have fruit. We have apple trees, we have raspberries, we have blackberries, we have blueberries. We can grow tremendous amounts of tomatoes and beans and grains and lettuces and more than we can consume. We try to give some of it away. We try to bring some to the farmer's market, but teaching that to people to be able to do that on their own. And it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take a vast acreage to produce everything that you need. It takes skills. Learn skills. We need to move to that local food movement. Being able to perpetuate those kinds of things. Getting away from big ag and learning again how to produce it on our own, preserve it on our own, perpetuate it to other people in the community, other people in the world, and being able to pass it from one generation to the next. I think this is key. This is key to having food security. The more that people learn to produce it on their own, the more security we'll have within our communities. That's the direction we need to go. Perpetuating it. If you are experiencing food insecurity, you can learn some things. There's others who want to teach you how to do certain things. There's acreage that's available for you to buy, for you to live, and many people can work remotely. And if you're in a place where you feel like you can produce nothing on your own, you need to get out of that place and learn to work with your own hands again. You may have to work at your job some way, but learning to produce it on your own is so important, perpetuating that to have real food security. Thank you for being with me today. We've considered 4 P's with food security, and we're going to consider the last one. And we'll do that next time. But thank you, and let's perpetuate food security. We have to move beyond simply storing up food for our own little families. We have to teach other people how to produce food and preserve it too. Thank you. Have a great day.